section, I'll talk to you about randomized controlled trials, or RCTs, which are the ideal way of finding causal links between exposure and disease. So the randomized part of the RCT is where you have your groups of individuals. And your groups of individuals you select based on in- and exclusion criteria. Inclusion criteria could be something like gender or age, but exclusion criteria is very often when they have a certain disease, you don't really want them in that group because that might skew your outcome. Or just in general, that they have to be of good health. Now, if you have this group of individuals, you randomize them to intervention or control. The intervention group will get the first one, the second one will go into control, and you continue on like that without really knowing who they are going into which group. And this will hopefully give you a very equal separation of the traits in the whole group. You can have blinding at this stage. You can have blinding of the subjects, that they don't know whether they are in controlled or intervention group. You can also have blinding of the researcher, who doesn't know who is standing in front of him. And the advantage of blinding is that you don't know, you can't see something that's maybe not there. If I would know a certain person is in the intervention group, I might pick up on different details than if I wouldn't know that. So it's to guarantee that the outcome of this is more trustworthy. The controlled part of the randomized controlled trials has to do with the in- and exclusion criteria that you can control. You can make your group smaller or bigger depending on who you want to target. You can say, for instance, it's only for women or it's only for a certain age group. The controlled also relates to the fact that you have a control group. So you have your intervention group on one side and you have your control group where nothing happens or where you have the usual treatments. And of course you control your exposure. The exposure is the treatment. Or is whatever you're trying to observe in the intervention. Then the trial bit is where you set up your experiment, your intervention. And you have your study participant, one half goes to intervention, the other half goes to control group. They have to take their pills, or they have to follow a certain regimen, or they have to do something that is part of your intervention. And then you compare the outcome, whether you can observe it or you can't. And you hope that your treatment has helped people more than the control. So what are your advantages and disadvantages in this? It's very causal. You can control it, you can control your intervention, so you know the intervention actually has to do with your outcome. So there is a high causal effect. It's very efficient as well, because you can put people into groups, you can observe it, you can go in and out and do it. You don't have to wait till something actually happens. And that's a very high validity. The downsides of this are ethics, of course. Can you actually keep a treatment from a group, the control group? Can you keep an intervention from them? That is okay if you compare a treatment with an existing treatment, and it might also be okay in the case of we were talking about with the polio, where one side of the country got the polio vaccination and only afterwards the other side of the country got the vaccination, and that had to do with logistics as well as the intervention part. But especially in vaccination trials, you have groups of people where you can't have a control anymore, because populations are now so well vaccinated that it's very hard to find a control group, or where you can't really say, I can keep the vaccination from the other group. A problem with RCTs is often as well the loss to follow up, and that people move away and you can't keep track of them, or that they don't want to join in anymore, or they get too sick, for instance, in a clinical trial. Practically, it's also not not ideal. You have to stick to a certain intervention, and you have to keep on doing this. And not only is that difficult for the person that is participating, but it's also very difficult to make sure that what you want them to do is actually what is happening, and that especially goes for lifestyle interventions. One of the parts of RCTs as well is the placebo effect. If you start giving people a pill, just by the fact that you give them a pill might make them feel better already. Or just by listening to people or asking them to do something, they might already feel better. That is a placebo effect, an effect of the treatment without giving a treatment. And that placebo effect can be taken out by comparing intervention and control, or making sure that if you have an intervention group and you give them a pill, you make sure you give the control group a pill as well, even though it's only a sugar pill. If you do something with an intervention, you try to repeat it in a harmless way in a control group. That will take out your placebo effects. And then you have the Hawthorne effect. The Hawthorne effect is a very interesting kind of bias that is observed very often as well. And it was first observed in Hawthorne, which is an electricity clinic in Chicago. And the owners of this plant wanted the people to be more efficient in their workplace. So they got a group of researchers in and to try and increase their efficiency. And they started off with playing with the lights. If they would increase the lights to a higher volume, would efficiency increase as well? And they found it actually did. But then it flattened out again and everyone was the same again. So then they tried another intervention where they had a control group and an intervention group, and in the intervention group they actually lowered the light, so the opposites. And still they saw an increase in efficiency of the people. And it wasn't the fact that they increased or decreased the light, it was actually the fact that they were doing something for the people, that they were giving these people some extra attention that was making the difference. So it wasn't the actual intervention, it was the fact that something happens. And since that time it's been called the Hawthorne effect. So when you do RCTs and randomized intervention, like I said, especially with lifestyle interventions, they can be quite difficult. And there's an example here. And one of the things they looked at here was childhood obesity and whether they could reduce that by reducing the fizzy drinks in a school. And in this case, they didn't randomize the patients or the children in the school, because it's very hard to give one child a fizzy drink and not to the other child. You couldn't really do that. So the randomization in this case happened at the school level, where certain schools did get the fizzy drinks and other schools did not get the fizzy drinks. So you have a randomized controlled trial where the intervention happened at a higher level, not at the individual level, but at the school level. Lifestyle intervention usually happen at that higher level, where you could do it at the school level, or maybe in a community where certain communities do get your interventions while others don't. So you don't necessarily have to randomize your individual, you can randomize groups of individuals. Randomized controlled trials are very high up in the causal chain. They can really show you the effect of an intervention, and if you do something about your intervention, your effect will increase or decrease. So there is a direct causal link. RCTs are therefore very widely used and more used these days for lifestyle interventions. That was an overview of randomized controlled trials. In this section, we'll talk about randomized controlled trials, or RCTs. And RCTs are like the summum of experiment or things you can do and control. Rather than observe what is happening, you actually control what is happening. So in the different parts of it, you have the randomized part of the randomized controlled trial, and that has to do with your population that you're selecting. And you select a group of individuals that are more or less the same. You have in- and exclusion criteria that you will apply to them. And you randomize them into control or intervention. The control group doesn't get a treatment or gets a treatment that is already available, and the intervention group will get a new treatment. They will be compared afterwards. You can have blind. In randomized controlled trials, the first part is about the randomization. And you have a group of individuals that you select for this, and these individuals are selected based on in- and exclusion criteria. The inclusion criteria could be something like their gender or a certain age group. And exclusion criteria would very often be that they don't have a certain disease, or that they are in good health generally. In the randomization process, you also use blinding, and you can do the blinding for both the individual, where the individual doesn't know whether it is actually in the intervention group or the control group.
That's okay, we have all that.
Yeah.